Okay, we're going to go ahead and start. We may have some others arrive as we're going through the material. I am recording this today. I've got everybody muted right now, but later on, if we get through in time, I may unmute and let you talk. So if you have questions or you participate, bear in mind that we are recording this and we'll rebroadcast it later so all the people that didn't get here for this can see that. We're going to be talking about selecting software to maximize your profit. If for some reason you lose connection or you can't hear during the seminar, go ahead and type a message in the comment box at the bottom of the little viewer, as I did a minute ago. And other than that, we're going to go ahead and start and work through this material. What we'll be doing today is taking a look at what the typical selection process looks like for a company first, and we'll talk about as we go through that selection process why some of those things don't work very well for certain companies. Second thing we're going to do is discuss the reasons actually that businesses do implement software, why they typically decide to change, and what kinds of potential fail points that sets up for later selection. And then finally, we'll take a look at a revised process that will result in better outcomes if you follow this particular process. Now, sometimes we modify the revised process, so consider it just an overview or an outline of things that you can do, but I think you'll see pretty quickly the benefits over the typical process. So first of all, let's take a look at this concept, and I generally tell clients that I believe that the right technology, the right software, correctly implemented is free. And I don't mean free in the sense that the waitress comes at the end of the meal and the bill is zero. I mean free in the sense that with the software you get a rebate card. And if you implement the software correctly and if you use the software correctly, over time you get a rebate, hopefully, that's at least equal to what you invested in the software, and very often it will be considerably more than what you've invested in the software. And that's really the goal that we encourage clients to shoot for, is to make their technology free by implementing it and selecting it in a way that pays attention to strategy and to ROI. So let's take a look at the typical process, and I didn't use any of the methodologies that are out there, any of the naming conventions, but usually that falls roughly into these 5 steps that you can see there: identify, evaluate, narrow, revisit, and choose. And by the way, don't feel obligated to copy any of this down. If you want a copy of this material after the presentation, just drop me an email and I'll be glad to send it to you. So let's talk through each one of these. Identify, we typically start out with some sort of an idea of what the budget for the process is. And when we start the process out, we begin by trying to locate software that's going to be within budget. Once we have names of software, typically we'll go out and try to find somebody that can be a vendor or a value-added reseller, as commonly used in this industry. So we narrow the list at the very beginning to the products that we anticipate are going to fit within our budget and typically within our industry. The next thing we typically do is begin to think about a list of requirements. Notice that we don't develop the list of requirements typically before we pick the software possibilities. At least in most client situations that I work with, the client that has started this process typically jumps right in to saying, let me see what's out there, and sometimes has seen several demonstrations before they actually get around to saying, oh, well, you know, we need to come up with a list of what we actually need. Some clients do an RFP. I've seen probably 24 RFPs in my 25 or so years of doing this. I've seen exactly one that actually seemed like the person who developed it actually knew something about this type of software. Most RFPs kind of degrade into a listing of features that somebody thinks they might need with no particular structure to it. And then based on that list of requirements or RFP or some sort of informal idea, of what the requirements are, the company begins to look at demonstrations. Now, you can tell this by calling a software company and saying, hey, I'm interested in your software. Typically, the first thing the salesperson is going to say is, let me schedule a demo for you. Let me come out and demonstrate the software. Sometimes they'll even want to talk to you for a little while before they demonstrate the software in order to get an idea of what your needs might be. After we do demonstrations, typically we see clients eliminate the vendors and the products that they didn't like, with really no comparison between fit for needs. There's just sort of a subjective judgment made based on the product or the vendor, and often upon some very subjective things that don't really relate at all to the business needs. Once they have narrowed to a few products, then after they've seen all these demonstrations, they've added to their list things that they need. And so now they realize that, well, there were 2 or 3 products that were pretty good in that list of 8 or 10 we saw, and we'd like to schedule sort of a final demonstration, and hopefully we even get that final demonstration done with some of our company data so that we can sort of see how the transactions flow through the product. And then finally, we wind up picking the vendor or the product that did the least wrong. And at this point, we start negotiations, and we often find that the budget we had set many weeks ago won't cover this purchase. And so we begin to stretch the budget and talk management into spending a little more, and pretty soon we have a new budget and we have a proposal for a product. So let's take a look at why, when we finally do a selection, in this process we have often missed a tremendous number of options. When we start out looking for software within budget, there's several problems. We're using budget as a filter, but we typically never come back and revisit the products we eliminated because of budget, even when we have changed the budget significantly. And I'll give you an example of that when we get down to the last step that I just saw with the client. The second thing about this is that the products are very complex, and small differences can make a big difference in the impact at the end. When we start out with a limit to what we're likely or what we're willing to spend, we don't look at enough products to really get, well, somebody else just joined us. Hopefully, we just kind of started a few minutes ago, but we'll continue. We are recording this, by the way, so if you want to watch it again later on, you can. So we're looking at a very complex product, and what we find is the selection criteria are very minuscule between one product and another. Whether a product fits very well or very poorly is often a matter of some very detailed features. The next thing is that often the amount of information that's available from vendors is, voluminous, but the information you really need to make a good decision is, how is this product going to fit with my business process? And that information may or may not be available. In many cases, we're evaluating products without considering how they're going to fit with business process. And finally, time and knowledge in this stage are limitations. So you wind up trying to add as many products as possible to the list of things you're going to consider. And at some point, vendors may, get frustrated with you, and you drop products out for no particularly good reason at the identify phase. So the second stage in a typical selection process is that we do an RFP, or we get a list of requirements, so we kind of try to wing it with some sort of an informal understanding of what we need. And one of the things that I've seen, and I don't know why this is that RFPs are typically prepared by someone that really doesn't know the products in the mid or tier 1 market. Very often I'll get an RFP from a customer that's been prepared even by a consultant. And you read the RFP and they ask the same question over and over again, or they ask a question that they should know the answer to because all the products in the mid-market do that. The other thing I see is that in many of these RFPs, the person who prepared the RFP knew so little about the products that they really couldn't do any work with the client to help them sort of expand